Hey, what's going on everyone? Jay's 2 cents here, and just when you thought NVIDIA couldn't get any more slimy, they remind me that they absolutely can.
We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. No, we interrupt this interruption with this interruption about new stuff from iFixit. Wish you had a new graphics card, but inventory sucks? Fix the inventory problems with iFixit. Whoa, don't drop it. Can't fix that with iFixit. Just kidding, yes you can. Wish you could take iFixit with you anywhere, but your pockets aren't big enough? Introducing the new More
and the new Minnow.
Take them with you anywhere. So get iFixit for your loved ones, or just get them for yourself.
So if you haven't been following PC gaming for very long, what I'm going to talk about right now may or may not be something that you remember from the past. So by past, I mean we're going all the way back to like 2016, 2017, when the 10 series or Pascal series was new. Now, in typical fashion, NVIDIA launches from the top down. Now there was no 90 edition card back then, but they certainly did have the Titan series cards, which came out after the 1080s and 1080 Ti's. 1080 Ti was actually the last card to launch prior to the Titans. But anyway, moving on, they 1080, 1070, 1060, right? Now the 1060 was initially a 6 gigabyte card, and it was designed to kind of fulfill that $250-ish price point. Moving on, as you know, NVIDIA tends to do, they start to really start to squeeze their product stack, and that's where they get the Ti models that fit between additional cards. You have the 1070, 1070 Ti, 1080, 1080 Ti, 1066 gig, and then the 1063 gig. But on the surface, the 1063 gig just looked like it was a lesser VRAM spec card, where if you were just running like 720p gaming, maybe 900p, 1080p, you could get away with a little bit less VRAM because you didn't need nearly as much of a frame buffer because you weren't running high resolutions, or maybe your games weren't that demanding to need any more VRAM than that. But when you start digging into it, back then we discovered like there were less CUDA cores, 256 less CUDA cores. Now obviously not only did the bus have to narrow with the less RAM, they're coupled that way, so I can't really complain about there being a narrower memory bus because it's just how it happens when it comes to the amount of RAM. You don't need as many RAM lanes, if you will, if there's less RAM. They just need the amount of RAMs each chip needs to communicate. So I called out back then that the whole 1063 gig was stupid, that it needed to be a 1050. Like they needed to name it a 1050 card. Anyway, moving on, with the 20 series and then the 30 series, they kind of did away with the whole let's try and have multiple cards with the same name that is disingenuous with the naming because of the fact that it's not actually that series of a card because there's less CUDA cores and etc. So now fast forward all the way to 2023, the 40 series launches and NVIDIA tries the sliminess again. Like maybe it's been long enough to where the people have forgotten that we tried to squeeze more money out of them by having a product be the same name, but it's not. Of course, I'm talking about the 4080 16 gig and the proposed, what was supposed to come out as a 4080 12 gig, as we now know was renamed the 4070 Ti, which is on a completely different die, the AD104, where the 4080 was on AD103. And remember, the lower the number with NVIDIA's die, the bigger, better it is. So it was very disingenuous to look like, oh yeah, for people that don't need 16 gigs, you know, we got a 12 gig model out there, but it was for all intents and purposes a 100% completely different card. The only thing it shared was GDDR6X. That was it. Everything else about the card was different. The die type, the bus, everything was different. So NVIDIA had to do an about face, and that's why there is no 4070 Ti Founders Edition card, because they all basically got turned into AIB cards at that point. Once again, you'd like to think a company like NVIDIA would learn from its mistakes, but no. The only thing NVIDIA hopes you'll do is forget. Only this time, they're hoping you'll forget the way things were on 30 series, because now, of course, I'm talking about the new 3050 6 gigabyte card versus the 3050 8 gigabyte card. Now, one of the ways that NVIDIA has tried to stay competitive in the entry-level market, and by entry-level being at this point apparently $250 to $455, I'm talking about the 3050 8 gigabyte card, which remember, at this point is old. That is an old card. It just exists to give people something to buy for 1080p basic gaming, and then not have to use any new die allocations for those new graphics cards that are at low end. Maybe the problem is they can't produce the AD chips at that price point currently. I don't know. Anyway, they're doing it all over again. This is the 1060 versus, or 6 gigabyte versus the 1063 gigabyte all over again. And it's like, anytime I feel like I just can't lose any more respect for NVIDIA's business practices that I already do, they do something like this and say, Jay, hold my beer, we're gonna double down. Or in this, well, technically with the 1066 to 3, they did double down, but this time it's just from 8 to 6. Let's talk about the specs. Okay, so let's talk about the CUDA core count. And the reason why I'm bringing up CUDA core count is, for all intents and purposes, that is what truly differentiates a tiered card on NVIDIA. Now, for instance, you might be saying, well, the 4070 Ti is 8104 and the 4070 Ti Super is 8103, so that's not true. Well, this is the first time they've really done that. This is the first time they've actually had an overlapping 7080 series cards on 2 different dies. Typically, 70 series cards would be on an 04 die, an 80 series card would be on an 03 die, and then Titan or /90 series cards would be on an 02 die. So now they've changed the rules that has given me even more argument against them. So what I mean by that is the 3058 gigabyte, which has now been out since like what, 2018, 19, somewhere around there, 19, is 2,560 CUDA cores, 2560. That is not a lot these days for today's gaming. That is not a lot. So to shave it by 256 CUDA cores, or 10% of its CUDA cores, is going to be substantial. So the 3056 gigabyte card has 2304. Now, like I said, that is 10% less CUDA cores, which means we could probably honestly expect there to be 10% less performance or more, depending on the need for RAM. But it doesn't stop there. That's if the core clocks were identical. Guess what? They're not. So the base clock or the boost clock on a 3058 gigabyte is 1.78 gigahertz. It's funny how high the gigahertz are now on today's cards, right? Anyway, the is 1.47 gigahertz on the 3056 gig. So we are talking 310 megahertz slower. And then if we look at the base clock, it goes from a 1.55 gigahertz on the 8 gigabyte model to 1.04 gigahertz on the 6 gigabyte model. There is a 3058 gigabyte like OEM card, which you would find on like Dell and HP and all that sort of stuff, which are super basic. They don't have branded or anything. They're just designed to go in there and just blend in with the rest of the crap, right? Whereas when you build it off the shelf or you're talking retail, it's like you can tell it's an MSI or an Asus or whatever it might be. That has a lower clock speed than the 8 gigabyte, like off-the-shelf retail cards. But the thing is, this 3056 gigabyte doesn't even match those clocks. They're even below those. So this is so disingenuous. Now, because it's 10% less CUDA cores, this is where I felt like NVIDIA just really needed to introduce a new naming scheme. For instance, a 3040. What the hell is wrong with calling it a 3040? They sold GT 1030s for freaking nearly a decade. So what's the hell is wrong with calling it an RTX 3040? Then at least it makes sense. Now in terms of pricing though, that's not a bad thing, because of the fact that calling it a 3040 at its new at the 3056 gig price of the lowest I found it for on Newegg was $169. Now these are not launched yet. They come out on the 9th of February, a few days from now. But anyway, $169 US to $189 US. Only $20 of gap there. Now these cards are such low power, they're designed to run entirely off the PCI Express slot, no supplemental power. I'd be surprised if any of the AIBs didn't put supplemental power on there, even if they stay at 70 watt, but NVIDIA might be controlling that to where they have to stay at 70 watt for whatever reasons. That's probably gonna end up being the case. I digress. It's not a terrible story to say, hey, we launched a 3040 that's at $170, $175 medium price. Not bad, because right now 3058 gigabyte cards are going anywhere from $250 to $455, which is absolutely asinine. No one should ever pay a $455 price point for a 50 series card. That is one of the stupidest things I've seen in this whole fiasco about pricing going all over the place for the last 4 years. It would have been a much more positive story if NVIDIA was just willing to add the name 3040. The reason why they won't, I'm pretty sure, is the fact that they're banking on people maybe being more willing to buy something that has a higher end name, even at the same price point. So for instance, if you had a 3040 at $180 or $175, that's the medium price right there, or a 3050 at $250, I don't know. I personally think people might be more likely to actually buy the 3050. That's just me. But now that it's a 3050 6GB versus a 3050 8GB, maybe they're thinking more people are just gonna buy the 3050 6GB because they think they're getting 3050 performance at a lesser price point. So even though we're talking a difference of like $70 between the two cards, they're gonna sell more volume of the 3050 lower, the 6GB card, than if they had just been honest about it. I don't understand the need for not naming the card differently when it's absolutely a different card with the shaved down CUDA cores. But Jay, it's on the same die. They changed the rules when they split the 70 series and 80 series cards between 8103 and 8104. Anyway, just a rant of mine. I want to put that out there. If you're shopping for a low-end graphics card that is based on old architecture because you're just like, I just want to play League of Legends, you know, I don't know, something like that, then just keep in mind, you're not actually getting a 3050, which is already a pretty poor performing card in most tests and most scenarios. You're getting a 3040. And I think that NVIDIA just needs to be honest with that. But the fact that NVIDIA won't make a simple change like that at such a minuscule area of their market shows just how disconnected they are. And you know what? It's every time I start to think maybe NVIDIA is doing things to try and earn consumers back, like the reduction of the cost of a 4080. Thank God they reduced it down to $1,000. They're really thinking about the audience on that one. Shows how petty they could be over 70 bucks. Well, they just giving you stuff for the end of the video.